But not least, of course, because we are one of them, but the mammals. Here's the list of all the orders. Again, similar to the birds, I'm not going to require that you know all the orders. I may require a few highlights here and there, like rodents are the most abundant. But other than that, you don't have to know all the orders of mammals. Here's some of the mammals. Duck-billed platypus, unusual, as is the echidna, because they're both egg layers. Marsupial, the koala. Giant anteater and the armadillo. And then we go into the carnivores. The Arctic fox, which actually sheds its coat twice a year so that it can match its environment. Diversity of mammals. Some people were originally confused about the diversity of mammals and how that could possibly happen evolutionarily. But if you look at Pangea, which was when the continents were all one solid piece, and how they related to each other, you can actually find similarities, as we discussed before, between the continents that way, and similar patterns between mammals. Evolutionary pressures, the common traits that you see in the mammals is hair. It's epidermal, it's periodically molted in most species. You do see some, I'm sure you're thinking of dogs that have to have their hair cut. It has been bred out of some species. They do still shed a little. You just don't notice it because it doesn't happen seasonally. Hair does actually have, there are mechanoreceptors at the base of the hairs so that they can get reception, touch receptors, and get information from their hair. It is an insulating layer. There are two layers. There's an undercoat and an overcoat so that they can get protection from their hair. Claws are epidermal. They are both used for both offense and defense, and they are formed differently depending on what they are. So this is actually really cool. I love looking at this because you can see actually how different the claws are formed here. Look at the difference between the dark blue and the yellow blue and the light blue. Claws versus nails versus hooves. And this will make it much more easy to see why hooves need to be trimmed as well. Then we have mammalian glands, which are special to this group. There are epidermal glands. There are sebaceous glands, like that are oil glands. There are pseudophorous glands, which are sweat glands. There are scent glands, which are musk glands, very common, used for territory markings among the mammals. And then there are, of course, mammary glands, which are used for milk production. Here you can see the difference in how the composition of mammary glands in humans versus cattle. Skulls and teeth. There are 3 middle ear ossicles. They are unique to the mammals. There's also a secondary palate, which becomes incredibly important because it means that you can breathe while your mouth is full or while you're submerged. In some cases, the submerged actually relates back to crocodiles more than it does mammals. So if you look at, you're looking here, if you see the soft palate here, it allows for airflow, food and airflow at the same time. Teeth. Homodont teeth are all the same. They're uniformly conical. That happens a lot in reptiles. Heterodont teeth are specialized. Those are not all the same, and that happens in mammals. They are, in mammals, deciduous, which just like a deciduous tree, it means that they fall out, and then you get a permanent set. The dental formula is, so you have an upper jaw and a lower jaw, and they're specialized according to the diet. So just picking up a skull, you can of course tell. I predict what kind of a diet. These are the formulas here and what you would expect to see in each species. So we are omnivores. So these are the incisors, canines, premolars, and number of molars then that we would expect to see. This is an herbivore. And you can also tell by shape will change in the molars and the premolars. So if you come down here to the carnivore, you can, it's not the greatest picture, but you can tell a little bit that the premolars and the molars are more pointy, whereas up here on the herbivore, they're flat, or they should be anyway, versus the beaver, which are also flat, and the dental formula, etc. The vertebral column on the skeleton, the vertebral column exists of these regions versus the appendicular skeleton, which rotates under the body, and the appendages move as an apopes posterior plane, which means front to back. Muscles, the skeleton bears the weight, and the muscles are concentrated in the upper appendages and the girdles, so around the center part of the body, around the pelvic region. Diverse feeding habits across mammals. Some of the orders are actually named after their feeding habits, like Insectivora or Carnivora. In the digestive tracts, you will find a couple of specialized structures, which we actually spoke somewhat about in digestion, and those would be the cecum and the rumen. Circulation, gas exchange, temperature regulation. There is complete separation of pulmonary and systemic circuits, so complete separation of pulmonary and heart, and that's because of their very active, most mammals have very active lifestyles. The extreme of the sedentary lifestyle would probably be the sloth, which only comes down from its tree once a week to defecate and bury it like a cat. In fetal circulation, there are a few different structures. The foramen ovale is a hole between the two atria, so then that closes up before birth, or at least it should. And then we have the ductus arteriosus. This is a blood vessel that allows blood to bypass the pathway to the lungs because there's no function there. At that point, respiratory gases are being received from the mother, and so there's no point in shunting anything to the lungs. It's a waste of energy. So that, again, that becomes dysfunctional before birth. Respiratory passageways are highly branched with large surface areas. Respiration, especially for those with high metabolic rates. Smaller mammals tend to have much higher metabolic rates than larger ones, and therefore need to eat more per gram than a larger mammal does. The diaphragm is what is a muscular structure that separates the thoracic and abdominal regions and is what is responsible for bringing air into the lungs. Temperature regulation, they are endothermic, so they have they're trying to maintain a constant body temperature, and they do so through a variety of means. They can shiver, or they can not shiver. They do have pelage, which is their fur, as opposed to using feathers. They have fat deposits. They may allow their surface temperature to drop, but not the core body temperature to drop in order to conserve some temperature. They do have certain postures which are more heat conserving than others. Likewise, there are certain postures that dissipate heat better than others. There is a countercurrent heat exchange system so that blood in contact with the surface blood that's cold they're going to run countercurrent to each other. So temperatures are going to run countercurrent to each other. For cooling, they can radiate it into the air, and you can also use evaporative cooling. So sweat glands are going to produce a liquid that's going to cool faster, or they can pant. A way to deal with winter. They can go into a winter sleep, which is a state of being less active, and there's some decrease in metabolic rate, but they don't go into as deep of a sleep. These are bears or raccoons. Some people might consider this to be torpor. Or there's deep hibernation, much more dramatic metabolic rate drop, and the thymus is reset. You cannot easily arouse them. Some insects, rodents, bats. It's really just a difference in severity of the process. Nervous and sensory functions. The brain, we have now an enlarged cerebral cortex, and so integrative functions shift there. So they have sensory functions are touch, olfaction, which the longer the snout, the more room for those sensory receptors, and the better their sense of smell in general. That's even happens like within breeds of dogs. The larger the snout, like the bloodhounds, the greater their sense of smell. Auditory senses. The pinna is the outer ear. That's actually what you see of the ear. Then sound is picked up by the three middle ear ossicles and amplified with the cochlea. Vision, the lens actually changes shape, and color vision is less well developed than in reptiles and birds. Excretion and osmoregulation happens in the kidney. It is metanephric, so they have well-developed nephrons. They excrete urea. They do have a long loop of the nephron called the loop of Henle, which is this loop right here, which is particularly long here because this is a kangaroo rat, which is a desert species. They can conserve water by producing dry feces, being nocturnal, condense water in respiratory passageways, and by having low protein diets. Evolutionary pressures continued behaviorally. They frequently use visual cues. They frequently use pheromones, like those would be considered some of the musky scent cues that are used for territorial markings. They frequently use auditory communication. I don't know if you've ever heard like elk bugling. And vocalizations and tactile communication as well. Territories are relatively common, or not uncommon anyway. The primates, for example, are frequently territorial, so that they will defend that area by invasion by other groups or other individuals. sea lions, or some of the territorial individuals. So reproduction and development of mammals, they are all viviparous. Actually, no, can't say that. They're not all viviparous. Most of them are viviparous, so that the female reproductive tract is modified. There are different reproductive cycles of female. Estrus is when the female is receptive to the male. So she has hormonal changes are such that there's maturation of an ova, and she's ovulating. So at that point, she's fertile. That's when the male should be attempting copulation with her. And males should be showing heightened interest in females. Some cases, there are triggers for males to identify females who are in estrus. The menstrual cycle, in contrast, that's not the same thing. Those are periodic proliferation of the uterine lining that correlates with maturation of an ovum. Now, that's not fertilization. Not all species go through a menstrual cycle when there aren't males around. Humans do, but not everybody does. Fertilization occurs, can happen a couple different ways. You can have delayed fertilization. There's for some reason, bats are the classic example, although there are some other species that do that, where bats actually, females hold sperm through the winter so that they can be fertilized early and have their young as soon as possible in the spring so that they can be very well developed by the time the next fall comes around and have optimally aged in order to survive that winter. You can also have something that's called embryonic diapause, where the embryo is arrested after fertilization. That happens when resources are most plentiful. Modes of development for mammals, the monotremes are oviparous. So those are going to be your duck-billed platypus and your echidnas. Those are laying eggs. Everybody else is viviparous. Even the marsupials. They're still having live young. They're just really teeny tiny when they're coming out and drinking uterine milk. So they're having a very short gestation period. That's the amount of time you spend developing as an embryo within the female. Most mammals have a much longer gestation period. Those are the eutherian mammals. So here we have the little marsupials feeding on milk. Okay, human evolution. I'm actually not going to review this with you, and I'm not going to quiz or test you on it, but it is here for you to review. This is where we are, along with chimpanzees and orangutans. So, and why we're there, which is what this discusses. Okay? Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. And it's not only in this, slideshow, it's in the other one that doesn't have me talking. All right.